It's 7 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, so you know what time it is. It's time for your weekly episode of SCV Chat. Before we get started, please remember, the views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are not necessarily the views and opinions of the SCV, its GEC, nor Division Brigade camps or other subsidiaries. How is everybody doing in Dixieland tonight? We got a great show for you tonight where, how do I want to describe you tonight, Mr. Hardy? The MVP of late guesting, because bless his heart, Michael Hardy now has the distinct dishonor of having the person we have called on at the most latest minute. I can't remember who had it before you, but you definitely have stolen the title. I don't know if that's a title that any historian or guest speaker wants, but Mr. Hardy was
probably just under an hour ago.
Probably just under an hour ago. I could go back and check, but we can't thank Mr. Hardy enough for coming on. We did have a scheduled program, but stuff happens sometimes and guests can't come on. And Mr. Hardy was very nice enough on one of his few nights off to come on here and have to deal with me. And I mean, no one really wants to deal with me on their night off. So I can't thank again Mr. Hardy enough and ask that to help get this episode out there. Please share this episode, everybody. Again, Mr. Hardy came out of the kindness of his heart, and maybe because I have some blackmail, or maybe it's because I might have his book and I might post it online before we can sell it. The world will never know. But Mr. Hardy is coming on tonight to talk about his new book coming out in about 2 weeks, I think he said.
I think the official release date is March 15th. So we'll see. Maybe we'll get copies. I actually went upstairs. To get a drink and find a nice shirt. And I actually went out on the porch under the carport just to make sure there was not a box of books sitting out there, because we could have had an official unveiling on a SCV chat. But alas, there was no box of books out there.
They're at my house. I'll send them to you soon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But yes, Jason, at the 9th hour with, very few seconds left to spare. If anybody deserves I can't even think of what we named the award, but the Thomas Franklin saving guest or whatever we had, of some person that comes on the show and saves an episode, it will definitely be earned by Mr. Hardy for tonight and all the other poor nights that we've had to do this to him. He has had schedule appearances. Bless his heart.
You tried to get me a couple of weeks ago, and I was not home at the time.
Oh, yeah. For one of our February episodes.
Yeah.
We'll try to actually schedule you down sometime tonight for the future.
That sounds good.
But yes, everybody, please welcome Mr. Hardy. And without stealing any more of his time tonight, I'm going to let him talk about his new book and go into a couple details about it.
Yeah. So, Harrison, do you like to eat?
Oh, I love it.
I love to eat too, and I'm sure that's fairly obvious. I mean, just all kinds of food, whether it be home cooking or a good Italian restaurant or whatever, I just love to eat. And I've been writing for many, many years, almost 30 years. And a lot of my writings have been, histories of regiments: the 37th North Carolina, the 58th North Carolina, the 39th Battalion Virginia Cavalry, the Branch Lang Brigade. And when you write on that level, you talk about food, and you talk about food because that's what the soldiers wrote about. They wrote about what they were eating. They wrote about what they wish they could eat. They wrote about how bad the things were that they were getting to eat. They wrote about what they stole or appropriated. They wrote about just anything to do with food. In fact, of all the letters I've read over the years, the only thing they talk about more is wanting to go home. That's it. So many soldiers would write, I'm trying to get a furlough. I just got back from my furlough. I can't wait till this war is over so I can go home. That's the number one thing, because they miss their loved ones at home. But the number two thing they wrote about was food. And in the things that I've written over the years, that's always come out. They would talk about how they organized their messes, about foraging, food on campaign, just whatever. And several years ago, not long after I had finished the Branch Lang Brigade book, I decided, there's enough material here to write a book just on food and one particular army. And I chose, since a lot of my writing is about the Army of Northern Virginia, that's what I chose to write upon, even though you could do this with the Army of Tennessee or some of the other armies and geographical areas, but I chose the Army of Tennessee. So that's kind of part one of how I got here to having this new book coming out. Part two comes in this little book right here called Pen in Hand: The Civil War Letters, or David Parker Civil War Letters. And it was edited by Riley Henry. Y'all have probably never heard of this book. Henry was a private in the 54th North Carolina, and he didn't go in until 1862. He's one of those men who was not conscripted, but after the conscription laws were passed, he decided that I might as well just go ahead and join before I get drafted into the Army. So he did. But he wrote home, and he wrote home a lot. And he wrote home about food. And he wrote about the good food he was eating and the bad food. So I came across this book because Parker actually lived 2 counties away from me. He's not a general. He's not an officer. He doesn't write grand sweeping narratives. It's just simple stuff. And I read it because he is connected to the area that I live in. And what he is he is brutally honest about food throughout the war. More so than just food, he is brutally honest about food and morale in the Confederate Army. He writes, let's see if I can find it here real quick, because we're doing all of this real quick tonight. He writes, they're in Petersburg, Virginia. It's December of 1864, and he is writing about how if they don't start to get more to eat, the soldiers as a whole are going to start leaving the army. And it's more than just it's more than just December of 1864. He's been writing this for about a year, that if things don't improve, men can only do so much when they're hungry. And I don't mean a little hungry. I don't mean that I missed lunch today. I meant that they were on just poor rations for months on end. And his descriptions of morale and how it is connected to food was the second thing that really pushed me to start working on this project. Well, not necessarily there's a group of historians out there who constantly hammer on the whole lost cause idea and about how Confederate soldiers were never, they were all well-dressed and they were all well-fed. And the idea of the hungry, ragged Confederate soldier was a post-war construct. And I decided when I started working on this project, I was going to focus on wartime letters and diaries. And I was not going to use very many post-war stories or post-war accounts. Very few memoirs, very few reminiscences. I didn't use those. I wanted letters and diaries. And so I looked at just over 300 sets of letters and diaries, and I constructed an almost day-by-day account of what Confederate soldiers were eating, what they wanted, what they were not getting, how bad the food was at certain times. So using the letters and diaries, some historians will not be able to come out and say, oh, it's a post-war construct. They really weren't hungry. Well, unless they could see into the future, then yes, they really were hungry. That's kind of the background and the setup for this. My experience in writing regimental histories, David Parker's letters, like I said, who served in a North Carolina regiment, and that idea that the how some people say how Confederate soldiers were hungry is something that came about post-war. They were never really that hungry in the conflict. And so I started going through all of these letters and diaries, and it took a couple years to actually read through 300 sets of letters and diaries. I took 316 pages of notes where I would jot down what the particular soldier was saying. And I mostly used field grade soldiers or privates or enlisted men. There is a chapter in the book on feeding Lee and Jackson and the other Confederate generals, and I did dive some into reminiscences in that, but the bulk of it is not like that. I had actually, just before you had sent me that note, had put up a little blurb on my Facebook page from the diary of Louis Leon, who was a North Carolina soldier. He's actually a Jewish North Carolina soldier. He is at Bethel Church area. which is near Richmond, Virginia. And he is writing on June 3rd of 1861. This is what he writes, quote, "Our rations did not suit us. We wanted a change of diet, but there were strict orders from Colonel D.H. Hill that we should not go out foraging. Well, Bill Stone, Allie Todd, and myself put on our knapsacks and went to the creek to wash our clothes. But when we got down there, we forgot to wash. We took a good long walk from camp and saw several shoats. We ran one down, held it so it could not squeal, then killed it, cut it in small pieces, put it in our knapsacks, returned to the creek, and from there to camp, where we shared it with the boys. It tasted good. Our comrade Earnhardt did not fare so well. He went to a place where he knew he could get some honey. He got it all right, but he got the bees also. His face and hands were a sight when he got the beehive to camp." So that tells us early in the war several fascinating things. Even in June of 1861, we've not even fought the Battle of Big Bethel Church yet. We've not fought the Battle of First Manassas yet. But this particular Confederate soldier is already like, hey, we're not really getting a whole lot to eat or good stuff to eat. So let's go wash our clothes, and then we can sneak off someplace and find something better, which they do. It also tells us that soldier named Earnhardt, he went to a place where he could get some honey. Now, did he go get just some honey? No, he got the whole beehive. And he brought the whole beehive back to camp, even though he got stung for it. And there are some fascinating bee stories out there. There's a great story in the book of some Confederate soldiers, I think from Louisiana, who are fighting at the Battle of Gettysburg. And they find a beehive out there in Gettysburg and decide that they were going to take it. And they run a pole through the beehive and carry it back to camp in between them, bees and all. And there's a description of all of these men running, Confederate soldiers running in every possible way, in every direction, trying to get away from those bees coming out of that beehive. And finally, when the bees quit the hive, they sit down and start to eat the honey. So lots of just fascinating little stories in this particular project, and things we'd never really think of. There's a letter in here someplace where a Confederate soldier is talking about going crabbing. This is June 10th, 1861, near Williamsburg, Virginia. And this soldier's from the 3rd Virginia Cavalry. And he writes home that some of his fellow comrades in the 3rd Virginia Cavalry went down to the river to bathe in the salt water. Some of the members of the 3rd Virginia Cavalry, quote, rode their horses out into the waters and set on them fishing for crabs. So, you know, we think of Confederate soldiers, when we think of Confederate soldiers, we think of men, you know, fighting at Gettysburg or Fredericksburg or in the trenches at Petersburg. This is not usually a view that we think of them, you know, out stealing beehives and riding their horses into the water to go crabbing. So I don't know if they had a net with them. I have been crabbing before. I've been shrimping before. You know, if you do it off a pier or a dock, you throw your light down in the water and you wait for them to swim by and you scoop them up. So maybe they had a net or something with them that evening. So part of this project looks at food in camp, food being issued by the Army, and how, you know, the Confederate soldier in all of these different regiments thought about that food, how they divided up their messes. You would get, some soldiers choose to just cook by themselves. Others would get together with 5 or 6 of their comrades and they would form a mess. And one person would be, or they could rotate, you know, people on who was doing the cooking, who was doing the cleaning, and who was gathering firewood and water to take care of those responsibilities. They quickly discovered that the vast majority of the men, the Confederate men, could not cook. I mean, that's evident over and over again in these letters. And they finally find people who can cook, and that kind of becomes their job. David Parker, that I mentioned earlier, the North Carolina soldier, he actually got hired by several officers in his company to be the officer's cook. And so he had a little bit more. He was excused from drill and all of this other stuff because he was there taking care of his company grade officers. So during the war, and this is pre-war U.S. Army, but it goes into the Confederate Army, your enlisted personnel would get issued rations by the government. Your officers, for the first couple years of the war, do not get issued rations. They get an allowance. So you get money, and you can either purchase rations from the commissary, or you can purchase rations from town. And so cooking for an officer's mess would have been a choice job. You know, you probably would have got better fed than you would have been if you were back in the ranks with the rest of the other enlisted men. So that's one part of what this project is about. This book is about. Second, there's another chapter in there about food from home. As I mentioned when we first started, the Confederate soldiers, constantly wrote home about the food they were eating. They often mentioned wanting boxes from home. And that it's a phenomenal thing to think about, all of this stuff that they shipped from home. And there are incredible letters and detailed letters about both what they want and what they got. And I'm trying with 300 and some odd pages of notes. Y'all have to bear with me for just a minute till I find the note that I want. So they're writing home, and they're saying, will you send me everything imaginable? If Harrison, if you think of something that you would want to eat, they probably ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, absolutely everything. But my favorite story in this part of, there's two or three, but one of them is this Alabama soldier whose aunt tries to send him live chickens from Alabama up toward the Manassas area. And the first time, everything goes missing. The second time, the coop actually gets to the depot near Manassas, but the chickens are gone. And he's pretty upset that his chickens have disappeared from the army. In fact, this particular soldier was actually in the 5th Alabama. There's a fantastic book out there called Voices from Company D that's got a huge selection of letters and diaries from Company D of the 5th Alabama. It is a marvelous book, one of my favorite books. Here is that letter right here. He writes, this is August 12th, 1861, near Union Mills, Virginia. Quote, while at the junction, Father found a box of provisions which Aunt Ann had sent a week ago. When we opened it, all the bread was molded and unfit for use. We also had a box of chickens, about 50. So I don't mean like 3 chickens. She sent about 50 chickens. And the agent having nowhere to keep them, the soldiers stole every one. We grieved more for the chickens than for anything else, for chickens does go fine in the army. I can just imagine how they would have tasted with good hot butter and a biscuit. Good hot biscuit and a butter. So that's one of those fantastic stories. So if you were getting a box from home, you could request things. If you were a Virginia soldier, I know of one account where a group in a community actually hired a driver who about once a month delivered a wagon load of provisions to that particular company. If you lived in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, you had to put your box from home on a train and hope that it gets there. Later in the war, there are people like pastors of churches and ladies' aid societies that will collect boxes and hire someone, or the pastor of a church will actually try and shepherd those boxes through the railroad system. But also the individual soldiers, I have found references where they being home, they'll put an advertisement in a newspaper, if your community is a newspaper, saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm at home on leave, I'm going back to the Army in 2 weeks. If you want me to take a box from home, have it at such and such an address by this date, and I will try and get them through. Here is a letter from a member of the 27th Virginia, also at Manassas Junction, talking about what he got in his box. Okay. This is the things that arrived. They got ketchup, pies, cake, apples, pickles, and wine, and tea when he arrived with his box from home, when he got his box from home. Here's another soldier who got onions. Here is a soldier in the 6th North Carolina. He's asking for preserves and pickles. There's a soldier in here who wants a possum sent to him. I assume the possum has already been dressed and preserved. I'm not quite sure how you preserve a possum to transport it on the railroad, but that's what he is.
Very good question, though.
I know I don't have an answer for that. So when I was working on my first book on the 37th North Carolina many years ago, I had a letter in there of this soldier thanking his wife for this box from home. And he said that all of the eggs arrived in good shape. None of them were broken. And I'm like, how in the world? I assumed they were raw since they were not broken, because if they'd been boiled, then that's okay. I found another letter from another soldier telling his wife that he wants eggs from home and asking her to pack those eggs in sawdust. So I guess after 30 years, I got my answer about how you could get eggs from someplace in South Carolina or North Carolina and get them to the Army in Virginia. So you have all of these boxes eventually, and the boxes are really adding variety to the diet of the Confederate soldier. You know, they are shipping sausages and dried fruit and preserves and alcohol and just everything imaginable. And it eventually, because the rail system, especially after September of 1863, the rail system across the South is really breaking down. In September of 1863, the Federals capture East Tennessee, and so the most direct link between the Deep South and the Upper South is cut. So now you have to take this longer journey through Georgia and either through Charlotte, North Carolina, or along the coast of North Carolina to get these items. And it creates a huge backlog. And all of these boxes are just sitting at different places. And trying to get all of these boxes and things. I mean, literally, there's a description of this place in Weldon, North Carolina, where all of these boxes are just sitting out in the open because they just don't have the resources to get all of these people and the Army stuff and all of these boxes from home. And it's a real challenge. I'm going to share with you one of my favorite letters from a member of the 26th North Carolina. We'll see if I can get through this without losing it. This was written October 8th, 1862. I go ahead and apologize. This is on the upper end of the PG level. This particular soldier has these boxes, and he's with a couple of other members of the 26th North Carolina, and he's trying to get them through the army, through along the railroad and to his regiment there in Virginia. Man's last name was Setzer, one of the Setzers and the brothers in the 26th North Carolina, October 8th, 1862, near Petersburg. He writes, quote, "I happened with bad luck with my boxes. I lost them. I fetched them on to Raleigh and then had to put them on the mail train and couldn't go in it myself. I had to go on another train, but Collett and Fleming was on the train that the boxes were on and said that they would have them taken care of when we got to Weldon. But they never looked for them when they got there. And when I got there, I couldn't find them. And I thought they had taken them on, but they hadn't, so I hadn't seen them. They wouldn't let me go back to get them," probably meaning his superiors. "They wouldn't let me go back to get them. And I tried to get that damn Fleming to go after them, and he wouldn't go. I told him I would pay all expenses if he would go, and he wouldn't at all. And that damneder shit ass than him never was him, and that damneder Bill is. And he ain't worth hell's room. He lay in his tent all day. You can't see him out of his tent where he goes to see the doctor. I want to tell you, Bob, I want you to tell Bob that I said he might go to hell and be damned. And the next thing I asked him to do, he will do it for me. I wouldn't do a thing for him to save him from hell." Now, some of y'all think your Confederate ancestors were saints. Let me tell you, these were all 18 or 19 or 20-year-old kids. Okay. And I wish I could show you how he wrote it, because I wrote it. He didn't write the way that I'm talking. It's just, you have to piece this together. So Setzer of the 26th North Carolina was really upset that his boxes had not got on the train from Weldon to their camp. And he was really ticked off at his fellow messmates that had not taken care of his boxes. So I apologize for that profanity there, but it was in a historical context. If we need to do one of them historical profanity things, whatever they call them that you see when you get movies these days, we'll have to put one up later.
I'll put it up. YouTube, Facebook, don't come after me for that, because we did put this channel years ago on Family Friendly, but everybody should know.
That's right.
You don't get between a Southern young man.
That's right.
And his food.
That's right.
I was at university, those were probably the same amount of words being said between 18, 19-year-old young Southern boys when food was involved. I will neither confirm nor deny that I might have been one of them boys after someone stole a box of my food.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It was some nice Southern chicken.
Southern chicken. So they asked for everything and got everything. I already mentioned the possums, the sausage, apple butter, chickens. Here's a letter from this is from the memoirs of William N. Pendleton, who was on staff with Robert E. Lee. He is writing home in December of 1862, and he's talking about a box that had been sent to Robert E. Lee. And he writes, quote, "Let me tell you the contents of the box, that you may be more anxious to get it. In this box are turkeys, 6.5 pounds of sausage, 2 tin boxes of apple butter, a pair of chickens, South cheese, 4 pounds of dried cherries to be stewed with some of the 3.5 pounds of sugar, 2.5 pounds of butter, half a bushel of dried apples, and 2 bottles of ketchup." You do know what South cheese is, right, Harrison?
That's a new one for me, actually.
Oh, we're going to have to revoke your Southern card.
Oh.
Also called hog head cheese.
I might have heard that. I'm a picky eater, everyone. I'm probably the most picky Southerner you'll ever meet.
So souse cheese or souse meat or hoghead cheese is when they take all the leftover pieces of the hog and basically boil it down into this, I don't know, cheesy looking substance. And then you like spread it on crackers and stuff and eat it. I have only had it once. My uncle in Georgia was cooking it, and that was the most revolting thing I have ever smelled in my entire life. But being young and greatly admiring this particular uncle, I tried it and it tastes. I know some of y'all like it, but I'm not a fan of souse cheese. I was trying to find another good letter in here. So one of the problems with the boxes is a lot of times they didn't have guards or anything, or if they did have guards, the guards would routinely go through your box trying to confiscate all of the alcohol that was being sent to you. And so there were a lot of problems with these guards breaking open all of these boxes and taking stuff out of those boxes. So that's what the second chapter in this project is about, is all of that food coming from home and trying to get to the Confederate Army. Then we move on to food in combat. What you're eating in camp a lot of times is different than when you're on the move. A lot of times the Confederate Army would try to replicate the Federal Army and issue hardtack, and sometimes the Confederate soldiers would get hardtack. More often than not, they got cornmeal. And you were responsible for baking your own bread. We'll come back to that in a second. Early in the war and maybe mid-war, the Confederate soldiers were trying to they tried to bake bread in in Richmond, and send it to the Confederate soldiers in the field, but that didn't turn out too good because it would go bad before they could get it to the men in the field. I know at least in Mahone's brigade, they tried to set up ovens and bake bread in camp, but the bread would come out light and fluffy, and the Confederate soldier didn't really like it. And they would get rid of it. They said it didn't fill them up like the hard bread did. On campaign, when you got this stuff, sometimes they would make this stuff called sluice. They would take their flour or their cornmeal. They would take an oilcloth, and they would kind of meet it out with little water and maybe just a pinch of salt. Salt was hard to get, but a pinch of salt. And then after you had fried your salt pork in your skillet or your canteen half or whatever it was you have, you would then put your flour mixture in there and kind of mix it up. And they made this stuff called sluice. There's also stories of soldiers taking the ramrod and making a dough, like you think of a breadstick or something, and putting it around the ramrod and sticking it over a fire and cooking it that way. I tried that once and spent the next 4 days trying to get my ramrod clean after it had been in the fire. So maybe that was not a big deal, but that bothered me to no end until I finally got that clean. So many times your mess equipment, your frying pans and your skillets, they call them spiders because they have legs on them. You would not have those with you on campaign. They would be stuck back in a wagon someplace and would be days late. And so you had to improvise all of these ways to cook your food. You would cook it on rocks. You would use your gum blanket to knead your dough or whatever you wanted to do. There's a great letter from Walter Lenore, once again going back to the 37th North Carolina, and he is talking about how and this was written in January of 1863. He is wounded at the Battle of Ox Hill, and he kind of catches his diary up in January of 1863, and he's talking about being on campaign and being issued pork and basically just eating it raw and liking it. And because, it just took time. And of course, there's the famous scene from Texas Regiment at the Battle of Sharpsburg, where they are trying to fix food. And this is early on the morning of September 17th, 1862. They are trying to fix food, and they're behind the Dunkard Church, and they start to get shelled by Federal artillery, and they are not able to finish their meal. So food in combat is a hard thing. There are many stories of Confederate soldiers going into apple orchards and taking apples, of raiding cornfields, and it basically makes them sick. You can only eat so many raw apples and roasted corn before your bowels are completely tore up. There's another warning for tonight: grotesque bodily functions. But the campaign part of it just produces an enormous amount of sick men, because they just can't get adequately fed. At times, the Confederate Army will actually drive cattle with them on campaign. I found a great diary from Nicholas Gibbon, who is with Branch's Brigade. He's serving as the brigade quartermaster / commissary, and he is driving a herd of cattle as Jackson moves toward eventually Manassas Junction, but they're not there yet. And he's driving these cattle, and they stop for the night, and he actually has to put up some type of pen. He doesn't elaborate. And then go find guards to guard the cattle before he can do other things that he's required to do. Well, this is before the Battle of Cedar Mountain. After the Battle of Cedar Mountain, they're not allowed to build fires that close to the line. So he moves his operation a little further behind the line, slaughters some of the cattle, and passes out raw beef to the soldiers as they are moving behind the lines. And so you had to stop and cook your raw beef, usually with no seasoning, almost no salt. So it was a pretty bland. It's not like going to Texas Roadhouse and having that, 14 or 15 spice rub that they put on there before they throw it on the grill and cook. Eating in battle. We've already talked about the 1st Texas at Sharpsburg. Eating in battle is really hard to do. Gettysburg is a great example. All of the cooks and the commissary wagons and all of that is well behind the line. And they don't really have access. Sometimes men, sometimes they are black men. We haven't really talked about that a whole lot. Some men will bring slaves from home to cook from them. Some men will hire free black men or slaves to cook for them. And they are the ones that are well behind the lines. And well behind the lines, I mean like 2 miles, 3 miles behind the line. And they are responsible for fixing this food and trying to get it to the Confederate soldiers. And there's a story, which of course I can't find offhand. It's in the book. There's a story. That's right. Buy the book when it comes out. You can pre-order it now. But there's a story about how the black man has fixed the food, and he has brought it to this particular regiment and has left it behind the rock, and then he's gotten out of there. Well, usually it is the first sergeant's responsibility to dole out the food two individual soldiers. Well, he's been killed, so the officer present actually orders one of the other men to take on that responsibility, and this is under fire. He crawls over to this rock, tries to divide up the food, and a man will come and get 2 or 3 different men's rations and take it back to him. And so there is eating while combat is going on, but there's a lot of confusion in a lot of these cases about where to find. And a lot of times, the men in the back doing the cooking can't find the men up front because, it's mass confusion anytime battle is going on. Anytime the opposing forces are engaged, it is mass confusion. So that's that chapter in the book, talking about food on campaign and what they ate and where it came from. And what do we talk about next?
If you want to wait a second before we can take a quick commercial break before we jump into what's next.
Sounds good.
Make sure to check out michaelchardy.com. I'm sure you have other places where this book will be sold, but I like supporting your website, so that's what I threw up there. Feeding Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. I was able to find that after you said you can go pre-order it. That's how quickly I wanted to pre-order my copy. So we have that link down there. Please support it if you can. That is actually, we're going to go ahead and say it and be like, that's tonight's sponsor for this episode is Michael C. Hardy's book. He is paying us by bailing us out of this episode. So please go support it. As always, Mr. Hardy is a great historian and has great books. Check out a couple while you're there. But we will be right back after this quick commercial break.
There is a place nestled in the rolling farmland of southern Middle Tennessee. A home constructed in 1837, nearly lost to the ravages of war. Saved by a servant and a Confederate general. A place where families loved and lost. If walls could talk, what stories could be told? If a place, a home, can feel love, loss, pain, surely this is one of those places. Nearby is a more recent structure, and inside are the stories of heroes and heroines, stories of battles won and lost, stories of sacrifices made by the people of its native soil. A place that will tell the true and complete story of the Southland and the war fought for its freedom. From the causes that led to the conflict to the modern-day struggles to protect Southern history. Historic Elm Springs and the Confederate Museum at Elm Springs are the general headquarters for the Sons of Confederate Veterans. A place where the story of the Southland and its historic struggle is preserved and told. Come and discover your history.
And make sure again to check out Michael C. Hardy's new book, Feeding Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. You can check it out at www.michaelchardy.com. So please go check it out. The link is in the chat. Make sure to buy the book if you want to read more of these stories, because we probably have enough time for maybe one or two more, if that. So please go check it out and please support Mr. Hardy there.
So I talk about, there's another chapter in here that talks about hospitals, both like your field hospital while a battle is going on and trying to take care of soldiers. And I really talk about in there the bad water. There's a story. Robert E. Lee actually says this, but it's kind of Well, a couple of things. He talks about how it would be easier to have children around him when it comes to camp sanitation instead of all of these young men, because the kids you can make listen, but all of these young soldiers you cannot. I say that to segue into this story. There at Jury's Bluff, in between Richmond and Petersburg, they had several bouts with sickness because they would do everything right by their tent. If you needed to go to the bathroom, it was right by your tent. If you cut up a chicken, it was right by your tent. And so you have all of this contaminated stuff all over the ground. It would rain, and that would sink down into the wells they were drinking for. They had dug for drinking water, and so they were really sick. But there's a chapter in here on hospitals, both field hospitals, and then when they get to one of the regular hospitals in Richmond or Charlottesville or Gordonsville or some other place, and the food that they were eating, the food they smuggled in. There's some great descriptions from nurses who were responsible for getting food for the soldiers that were sick and convalescent there in the hospital. And then I don't know if I have a favorite chapter. But there is a chapter in there I mentioned earlier about feeding Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson and the other Confederate generals. And there is a lot of material in that chapter that kind of messes up some of our ideas of who Lee and Jackson were. But it talks about food coming into camp specifically for Lee. You wanted to be on Lee's staff because people sent him boxes of food all the time. You did not want to be on Stonewall Jackson's staff because Jackson, what did he call that he had? It's septic or something. He probably had irritable bowel syndrome. So he knew what he could eat and could not eat. And what he did eat was extremely limited. And he would turn down all of these dinner invitations and everything because it just made him sick. So you didn't want to be on Jackson's staff, even though there's some great stories in there. But we don't look just at Lee and Jackson. You know, we talk about James H. Lane and Billy Mahone and some of these other Confederate generals. David Pope, thanks for putting that out there, but I can't even say the word. Dyspeptic, whatever that is.
I'm not trying it.
My darling bride is sitting over there trying to tell me how to say it too. So there's a lot of stuff in there. And just, it was a lot of fun to put together. It was heartbreaking to put together, just so much good material. And I encourage you to check it out. I will be on the road all over the place this summer. You showed our great commercial from Elm Springs. I'll actually be there in September. In Columbia, Tennessee, and Athens, Alabama that same week. And I'm going to Winchester, Virginia, and Charlotte, North Carolina, and Kingsport, Tennessee, and just all over the place. So do y'all have any questions? I've not been paying any attention to the comments. So were there any good questions?
I think we had a couple. Let me go back. There's one I remember from Jason. And I'm trying to see where it is. Okay, here's one from Jason. No, it had to be common. Any good letters or diaries of the men going out to hunt for rabbit, deer, or squirrels, etc.
Yes, and the Confederate government or the Army of Northern Virginia actually had to put a stop to it because the soldiers would go out there in the woods with their rifles. And one of the officers actually writes back that it sounds like there's a minor skirmish going on out there in the woods because all these guys are out there hunting. So the Army would pass a regulation saying that you couldn't be outside of camp with your firearm. There's another story from a Confederate officer, maybe Pendleton, where he is actually making it may be Ewell. Where he is actually having his slave in camp make shot for his shotgun. They've taken a big spoon and they've poked holes in it, and they are melting lead and putting it in there, letting it fall into a cup of water. making wing shot, so he could go bird hunting. I think that's Yule. Yes, they did go hunting some. But once they really get locked into the Petersburg siege, all that really comes to an end. There's just no place to go to hunt anymore. So yes, they did go hunt some. James Martin, you are correct. I do not like souse. Boiling the meat off the head until it's a congealed mess. Yes, and it smells horrible. It's just gross.
You make fun of me for not eating it, and then I hear about people describing it in the
But
comments.
I tried it. Okay, I mean, I greatly love this uncle, and he was in there. Of course, his wife would let him cook it in the house. My aunt wouldn't let him cook it in the house. So he had this little kitchen area set up outside, and he would fry fish and boil hog head and everything out there. So
this might be a Yankee quality. It's probably the only one I have, but I will say, if I know I'm not going to like something from what it is described or my gut feeling, because a lot of people make fun of me, and it has backfired. For instance, for years, I didn't eat catfish until I went to a celebration of Nathan Bedford Forrest's birthday in Tennessee, and that's all they had. And I'm a heavy set man. I was hungry, and I was like, you know what? I'll try it. I liked it, but I will also say my gut feeling has not failed me that much. So I trust my gut feeling. That means I ate a little.
Catfish is good, soaked in buttermilk and fried up.
I haven't eaten supper tonight, man.
Yes. So I will post dates that I'll be out and about traveling to a lot of these camps. And if you'd like me to come visit your camp, drop me a line. There's a contact form on my website, and we'll see what we can do.
I would highly recommend it. I cannot wait. I will find a day, one day soon, hopefully, where I can see this man in person and listen to him speak, because I've always had just great respect for him as a historian and a great speaker, all in all. So please share this episode out, and please let people know about the new book coming out, Feeding Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Michael Hardy has a history at this point of publishing so many great history books that he has already put back my book budget for at least a decade. So please go support him, because he is just one of my favorite historians. And I'm not saying that just because he's on right now. If you ask me privately, I'll put him up there. So please go support him, and thank him again for coming on. Yes, I do eat catfish. I didn't eat it till 2021, because
he didn't say catfish. He said crawfish.
I said crawfish.
Are we talking about David?
Yeah.
You eat crawfish.
I tried it at a basketball fundraiser in high school. And I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't enjoyable. I liked it, but for some reason, to steal something to steal an exact quote from Mr. Hardy earlier in the episode, my bowels tore up. And I just did not feel like experiencing that ever again. And so I haven't eaten it since then.
It could have just been who was cooking.
That was my father, I think. So I'm not going to comment on live on air, because he
just could have been who was cooking.
So it was my senior year, 2018. And I ate one piece. I didn't eat a piece before that. I haven't eaten a piece since then. And the only reason I tried it was good old-fashioned peer pressure from my teammates, because I think at that time I'd been elected team captain, and they were like, how could we follow in your footsteps if you don't eat crawfish? And I was like, fine, I'll eat one. And it was about an hour later, I was like, something ain't right.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, but to steal an official term, bowels tore up. That's a new shirt coming to scvchat.com. I don't know how I'm going to find a way to use it, but mark my words, I want that to be a t-shirt. But yes, I do need to visit the Virginia battlefields again. It's been way too long since I've been in Virginia. But again, let's thank him, Mr. Hardy, for coming on again. He bailed us out and did a phenomenal job doing so. Share this episode out, and we can't wait to have you on again soon in the future, Mr. Hardy. And y'all be on the lookout because, as always, he's good. And we do have another historian chipping in now with Dr. Mitchum saying crawfish are too much work. And I couldn't agree more. I spent whole family functions waiting for something I knew I wasn't going to eat. But I was required to be there. Yes, great show from David and from Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief Tony Griffin. And I couldn't agree more. Make sure, again, one more time, share this episode. Make sure to tune in Thursday for Commander's Comments, where we'll have Commander-in-Chief Donnie Kennedy on to give your update on national SCV business. And tune in next Monday. I don't have my schedule in front of me to see who we have scheduled. That is that's always fun. But as you can see, I'm settling back in my home and nothing was ready. I've been at work all day. Mr. Hardy can attest to that with how late I responded to some of his messages. I just was at work and trying to get back to my computer as quickly as possible for tonight. But let's thank him for coming on one more time. And until next time, remember, chat heads, no Fumar in the elevator. Good night, everybody.